So we have a panel of leaders and advocates for our cultural landscapes that cover from ridge to reef. Our first two presentations will bring to light the indigenous residents of our blue planet, mambayena, whales of the Marianas, and we'll wrap up with a focus on balutan, not necessarily the foods or the things we package, but the packaging we use from the first European visit 500 years ago to today and 500 years into our future. Each presentation is allocated 20 minutes, and then we'll follow each presentation with a 10-minute Q&A. So our first presentation is a dynamic duo of Femmalautan leaders and advocates. Former Guam Senator Dr. Kelly Marsh-Taitano's PhD in Cultural Heritage studies from Charles Sturt University, Australia, builds on her Master's in Micronesian Studies and Bachelor of Arts in History and Anthropology from the University of Guam. She is a research associate of the Micronesia Area Research Center, UOG, and taught for numerous years as an adjunct professor for the UOG Department of History. He has held several leadership positions within Guam and continues to carry out community outreach. Dr. Kelly is joined by a daughter of the CNMI, the Honorable Sheila Babauta, who is passionate about contributing to a brighter Marianas. At the age of 29, she gained the trust and confidence of her community in Precinct 4 to serve as a member of the 21st CNMI House of Representatives. Sheila continues to serve in the 22nd CNMI legislature, currently holding key leadership positions as chairwoman of the Natural and Cultural Resources Committee, vice chairwoman of the Education Committee, and floor leader of the Saipan and Northern Islands Legislative Delegation. Señoras, Jesus Masi.
With the name of our presentation, we named it as such to recognize, especially for Guahan, that songs once filled the air from our native birds. And while the songs of whales currently fill our sea, we have learned this lesson, or we must learn this lesson, that this cannot be taken for granted. If we don't step up and protect our dolphins and whales, we have to ask ourselves, will our oceans become as quiet as our jungles, at least on Guam, as they have? In order as leaders to provide protection, we began a journey of talking to experts like Brent Tibbetts, whose presentation will be after us, and learning about our relationships between the peoples in our region and the dolphins and whales in our waters. For the Guam legislature, we passed nearly unanimously across party lines a resolution that calls for their protection. This has become a journey not only to safeguard, but to reclaim connections, perhaps lost, or at least not widely known within the Marianas. We have found archaeological reports, historical documentation. We have learned of seafarers and listened to elders with knowledge of these connections in the past. This has caused us to re-envision what we thought we knew about our region and the Pacific. So the next part here is we'll listen to an example. Perhaps we're familiar with the sound of humpback whales singing in all waters, but in our waters as well. But there's a sound that was recorded in 2014 that was first heard here, at least formally, and it's been attributed to that of the mink whale.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. It is my pleasure and honor to be here with you today. And we wanted to begin by sharing this timeline. It is a helpful visual that reminds us that we've had a relationship with whales for thousands of years, with the white section of the timeline displaying the existence of whales during the Latte and pre-Latte periods. And in just the past couple of centuries, shown in yellow, we can see outside forces such as whaling and colonization beginning to enter and disrupt their habitat. In more recent years, colored in red there, we have the introduction of active sonar, a harmful activity now threatening their safety. This is important for us to be aware of, not only because we're still uncovering the mysteries of whales in our waters, but because, next slide, please. But because the Pacific connection with whales has been a sacred and spiritual connection that is found to be common across the Pacific. I believe there's some information on this slide. If we can go ahead and, yes, you can go ahead and keep on clicking to show the entire slide. Through legends, oral teachings, and historical records, a common thread has been established in the Pacific worlds in the way these sea mammals were viewed by our ancestors, often described as living with whales and humans of the sea. Due to their high levels of intelligence and other attributes, human interaction with whales varied from them being helpful during fishing expeditions to being playful and at times even displaying deceitful behavior. Most indigenous peoples recognize varying degrees of relations with whales as kin-based or political, respecting the gift of whales, seeing whales as giving themselves to our communities, sacrificing themselves as food in times of need, and providing materials for tools, furniture, jewelry, contributing to the wealth and status of these communities. Indigenous peoples often observe ceremonial practices to honor the whale, reflecting the values of stewardship and responsibility for these beings. Our relationship is historical, and we must learn more about this special relationship and share it with others, especially because, next slide, please. One more time, especially because encountering whales in our Marianas is more common than you think. As you can see in this picture, humpback whales spend their winter months in the Marianas, and recent studies established that the Mariana Archipelago to be a breeding ground for species of the humpback whale, a missing breeding ground just recently discovered by scientists after studying whales in our area just 6 years ago. Humpback whales are not just passing through the Marianas on their way to other breeding grounds, they are using our waters to mate and give birth. Most of the whales encountered during their studies were found close to our lagoon in waters shallower than 330 feet. NOAA has even launched a project called Humpback Whales of the Mariana Islands Sighting Project, also known as #MIHumpbacks, for those who wish to contribute to a scientific study of the ecology and movement of these little known whales in the Marianas. So we need to find out more about them so we can provide better protections and allow them to thrive in our waters. And I'm just so grateful and proud to call the Marianas my home, where we have the privilege of being so close to these beautiful and mysterious sea mammals. Next slide, please.
So as far as the whaling, there are certain ways that we typically talk about whaling in the Marianas. It, of course, is a continuation of the ushering in of that interaction between the peoples of the Marianas and Europeans, later on Americans and others. So we often talk about the immigration, where we use terms like opportunity and adventure. And for that, We have documents that we've traced and found where we have 700 to 800 whalers from our islands that we know got to Hawaii, that they went to places like Massachusetts and other states. They went to places like the Bonin Islands and other places and countries around the world. And through these ventures out, they had certain historical situations that they were part of. For example, those that went to Massachusetts and elsewhere in the States, some of them actually signed up and participated in the US Civil War. So there are very specific histories tied to this. What is not talked about as often is throughout the Pacific, there were instances of impressment for whaling and for trading and for other types of ships that plied the waters. And that too is part of the history. It's also often talked about as an economic boom, that these ships would come here for weeks on end with their sizable crew. They would spend their money at the pubs. They would spend time with women and people of the Marianas. They would form friendships. They would leave offspring. Sometimes they left ship and became permanent members. And sometimes their last names became part of the culture and the landscape. But that isn't the only part to this story. There was also disease that they would bring with them, sometimes having really devastating effect, like losing 200 of our community members from the influenza that was brought with them. And venereal disease was part of what they brought as well. And there were violent encounters. There are the documents that speak of the drunken brawls and other types of encounters that had violence that were part of them as well. And perhaps the least discussed of all of this is the impact of these countries and what that lasting impact has been. So in our waters, from the early 1800s into the 1900s, we had these whaling ships. Many were from America. We also had British whaling ships and some Japan whaling ships as well. And for the US, perhaps we haven't talked about it enough, but it's something to continue to look at, is that this US tradition of American whalers brought with it American imperialism. So in this rush for resources was rush for territory. And with these whalers came these requests for mapping, for defense, and for other support. And these geopolitical considerations became part of our reality here. And they are a strong part of the landscape in Micronesia right now. And they continue to be intertwined actually with the whales. So let's see if we can get to the next page here. And one of the large impacts is severe population loss. We are talking about, for some of these populations, 80 to 95% for some of the species and up to 99% or more for some of the species. So devastating loss. And these impacts are multi-types. One obvious is to the whale populations themselves, but another is to the Pacific peoples, to those special connections that they had, those spiritual, familial, and cultural and sacred connections to these dolphins and whales, but also as food resources. These at times were food resources in times of need, and yet much of those stocks have been depleted to the point that scientists wonder if these populations will ever really recover. So as was mentioned, there are scientific studies, and from it, we are finding out fascinating things. We are finding out that we maybe have 20 or more different species of dolphin and whale in our waters, that 5 of them are endangered, that some of them have been spotted or maybe are yet to be spotted and haven't been identified. And it isn't just here. this is something that is ongoing. We heard just a few weeks ago that there was an announcement of a new type of species identified just off of Mexico. And a couple months prior to that, there was the same sort of announcement of a new type of species identified off of India. So this tells us that there's much to learn. And again, we need to protect and safeguard before we learn what it is that we actually have. And as was mentioned, we are finding out that the Marianas specifically are significant breeding, resting, and feeding grounds. Now, at the same time, we have the unfortunate situation of the dolphins and whales facing many threats. We see several of the main ones that are listed here, from pollution to climate change to ship strikes. And one that is becoming of growing concern is active naval sonar. Active naval sonar is described as, let's see, where it is this rolling sound waves that reach up to 235 decibels. And for comparison and to understand this, they say the loudest rock band reaches decibels of 130. And yet we have something that far surpasses it. And not only does it far surpass it in level, but in the distance that it carries. These sounds can carry up to an intensity of 140 decibel for hundreds of miles. And this causes many reactions directly with the dolphins and whales. Now, the toothed whales and dolphins, they use echolocation. So they use very similar types of sound waves. And some of these are very problematic because they're in the same wavelengths that are used in active sonar, and that makes them particularly devastating. So with this, as they rush to get away from these sounds, they can rush hundreds of miles away, which means that they may stop coming to these significant grounds, and we stop having these connections. And what they bring when they come here, the health to our waters and our ecosystems that are here. And as they rush away, they may be surfaced too quickly, and that can cause them to bleed through their eyes and their ears. It can cause them to develop what we call the debends, and that can be fatal. It can disorient them, and it can cause temporary deafness, all of which can have severe impacts for them. So with that, we have been noting with the scientific studies and the other documentation that we are doing, that as we're noting that we have dead whales that are washing up, especially beaked whales that are shown here, that they are very specifically, at least for some of them, associated with active Navy sonar exercises. And so there have been scientific studies that are saying that this is a very strong correlation. So these studies are happening elsewhere, but they are absolutely happening within the Mariana Islands and coming up with these strong conclusions.
Now, we wanted to share this cartoon because it depicts the controversial situations where communities have had to go to court to address protections of our marine mammals in the context of harmful military activities happening in our waters. Now, although even our local community groups have had to take this approach with Earth Justice representing Guardians of Ghani, Tinian Women Association, Pagan Watch, and the Center for Biological Diversity, we would like to avoid going to court in the future by means of open communication, public education and input, and collaboration with the scientific community. Next slide, please. So the way forward is hopeful, with more and more of our community members getting involved and wanting to participate in the protection of our marine mammals, natural resources, historic and cultural sites, as we begin to recognize the economic impact and see the growth in dolphin and whale watching tours. We must ensure adequate protections are in place to preserve the potential markets and experiences we can offer our people and our visitors. Again, cooperation is crucial to the way forward as we share information, conduct research, look into passive versus active sonar activities, and designate protected areas. Next slide, please. This beautiful blue map illustrates the amount of protection in the Pacific for whales through legislation and sanctuary designation. We see the example set by the South Pacific communities that really encourage us in Micronesia and in the North Pacific to have the right protections in place that also allow for Indigenous practice to continue. Palau is circled because we wanted to highlight that in 2015, Palau's Congress voted to establish the Palau National Marine Sanctuary that took effect January 1st, 2020, which covers 80% of Palau's national waters and prohibits extractive activities such as fishing and mining. It is the largest percentage of a country's exclusive water with a fully protected designation, and it is twice the size of Mexico, making it the 6th largest fully protected ocean area in the world. In closing, I believe this is my last slide. Since it is the month of February, I hope that you spend some time outdoors and in our waters. And if you encounter a whale, please don't forget to share it with us with the hashtag #MIHumpbacks. I believe if we can impact and expand and extend our impact into the ocean through experiences and technology, then it is our responsibility to also expand protection and stewardship.
So Sidus Masi, then Olomwe, and I believe that we have a video to share that Congresswoman Babauta was able to provide.
Oh, yes, so this is a short clip that was shared. It went viral in our community because local fishermen came across some whales in the ocean while they were on the water. And we just want to warn everyone that if the volume is on, there may be some colorful language on there. Just, also showcasing the shock and excitement that our community and our people still experience when encountering whales in our waters.
Oh shit! Fuck everything.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that video. I think that was just something that got our community excited when it was shared, when it went viral. The island in the background is Rhoda. You could tell by the, they call it the cake.
Oh, yes, the wedding cake, yeah.
Yeah, the wedding cake mountain, but that's how close some of our fishermen and fisherwomen get to the whales in our waters, and it's just so special. I think it's so special that we here in the Marianas get to experience that during this time of the year.
Earlier in the chat, we had a question about the purring sound of the whale. Was that a minke whale?
They believe it's a minke whale. There is a scientific paper that was written about it. If you Google this, I guess it was quite a buzz in the scientific community as they were trying to figure it out. It doesn't sound like it comes from something organic, right? It sounds a little like a technical sort of a sound, and they were talking about that. It's called a biotwang, is the name that it was given. But that was recorded, I believe, in 2014, and they did quite a bit of study on it.
Kuhan also mentioned in the chat that they remind him of Menamku. They really are our ancestors.
Yes, and that's the exciting thing is when I talked to seafarers, they talked about encountering them. And so of course they must have been encountered over the thousands of years. And then as we were talking to others, we found out that there was documentation of drive hunting and that there are elders who have some of this oral knowledge that they have passed on through the generations about their connections with very kind of spiritual and family, for lack of a better way to describe it, kind of like a totem, right, within the Marianas. So we had heard things about these sort of connections for places like New Zealand and elsewhere, but to learn that we have it within the archipelago, I think it's not widely known or understood, and there's probably a lot more asking and listening that needs to happen.
Okay, we also have another message from Kuhan, Flag Commander. If you see that on the chat, Dr. Kelly and Congresswoman Babauta, regarding the U.S. Right to determine which species may live, which may die.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, from Kuhan asked, who gave the U.S. the right to determine which species may live or die, especially the impact that these sonars are having to the whales? If either of you can comment on that.
Yes, well, you know, these are some of the issues. Here we have indigenous cultures that have these lengthy traditions with dolphins and whales, and then it's a very common problem that there's a clash between how this gets handled with modern governments and international governments and so forth. And so the US government follows US laws, international laws, but there is that understanding that the indigenous cultures might really suffer and get the short end of this. And so that's true. For others to be deciding what happens in indigenous cultures, it is contentious. And we do see that those discussions happening. And this, I think, is part of what is important about Congresswoman Sheila continuing to work with this and myself, is that it hasn't really been pushed for the Marianas and maybe not for Micronesia. So maybe this is something that we need to be really pushing for, these indigenous rights to the ocean resources.
And in fact, one of the comments was also that there ought to be some kind of whale protection in Micronesia, you know, throughout our entire region. And Lenny Leon also shared with us that there are legends in some Micronesian islands about whales being mothers of certain clans. For example, in Kosrae, the mother whale and her human daughter. And that's something that you had mentioned, Congresswoman Sheila, about the relationships that our ancestors have had with these great, still mysterious mammals of the sea.
Yeah, it does become interesting how for us, we have a Serena. For Palau, they have a very similar oral narrative about the dugong and the mother-daughter relationship. So throughout the Pacific, these seem to be very common, these relationships about dolphins or whales taking human forms or humans becoming dolphins or whales later, and this fluidity back and forth, and this this real connection between them. So it's something that we've really enjoyed doing, is listening to the peoples within the Marianas and our Micronesian brothers and sisters. And I believe Congresswoman Sheila is of the same mind, that we want to do a lot more of that, because they are powerful to hear, and they're so important for us to take into consideration as we think about conservation, as we think about sustainability, and how to approach these in appropriate ways.
Yes, I just wanted to also add, Monica and Michelle of MCCA added that an elder from Rhoda also told them about they turn into whales and dolphins in the afterlife. And so all of this is really, again, as really becoming aware and fostering this connection. Because, and I think that's really reflective of the central tenet of our culture of afamalik. And in afamalik, when things aren't right, we try to make it right. And so when it comes to people, our natural environment, and our economy, there really has to be balance. There's really got to be balance in that, and having these kinds of discussions. Really appreciate the work of the two of you as leaders and strong community advocates. Dankluna Sizus Maasi. I think we have Janice Tovis, who, according to the Pali Romans dictionary, the Chamorro name for well is Salungai.
Yeah, I'm so pleased that she shared that, so we can look that up, because of course we want to just keep on finding out more and more. And I just want to emphasize also that, you know, I'm curious to find out how far this goes, because in the Philippines and in Japan, there are very strong traditions of connection and using them as a food resource, and into Indonesia. So it's very widespread, and I really would like to get this larger understanding of where it sits within this larger picture.
Yes, and we also have Lenny Leon that this topic can be part of the Micronesian Leaders Summit as a unified resolution. And
That's
that
great.
Yes, absolutely. And from David Lotz, thanking both of you for an excellent and very informative presentation. Dispensa, we could just keep talking and sharing, but we have so much more, and we will, if we have time later after the two presentations. So thank you, Dankluna Sizus Masi, to both of you.
Sizus Masi. And I'm looking forward to the next two presentations as well.